All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we might as well get going here. We've got quite a bit to get through today. So welcome to everybody that has taken the time today to join us. I really appreciate that. We'll have close to 40 attendees, and for this significant development with the release of the US FSC National Risk Assessment. So my name is Ciara McCarthy, and I'm a staff employee here at SCS Global Services, and I am a technical specialist for the Controlled Wood program. The other voice you've been hearing there has been Melissa, who's the technical manager. And Melissa's on here today to assist me with little things like making sure we're on the right screen, and she's going to help as well with the question and answer portion, which we will talk about shortly. I'll give you some instructions on that as well. The webinar is being recorded, and it will also be available on our website for colleagues, of viewers that have maybe not been able to make the webinar today. So that'll be available to those at a later date. So the FSC US NRA for the conterminous US, which is the lower 48 states, was approved by FSC International on April 5th, 2019. So that we're about 10 days into it being approved, and that started the clock on the 6-month implementation period for certificate holders. We've been involved at SCS with multiple national risk assessments or central national risk assessments rollouts throughout the world, and the conterminous US is the 41st to be approved. Okay. All right. So the overview of the presentation, again, it is for the lower 48 states, coast to coast. It is a significant body of work for us to get through today, and the objective of this presentation is to ensure that certificate holders know what specified risk has been identified and what control measures are available. We will not be taking any questions live during the presentation or at the end. However, we're providing 2 forums for you to ask questions. One is through the go-to chat box, which I'll just, let me just pull this over here to you. You can add your questions down here under the chat, and you can make it available to the entire audience. Type your questions in here. Melissa and I will go through these at the end and pull out any questions that we feel haven't been answered as a result of the presentation, and we will get back to you with some answers afterwards. I'm going to move this back over here. Alternatively, you can send me an email directly at cmccarthy@scsglobalservices.com. So again, if they're not answered during the course of the presentation, we will be putting together a questions and answers information sheet that we'll circulate after the presentation. We hope to be able to answer all of the questions. If we're not able to answer them, we will seek clarification from FSC US and talk to Amy Clark Eagle and see, you know, if there's a way of collaborating some of the responses to questions that we're unable to answer right now. Okay, so please keep that in mind. Put your questions in the chat box or send me an email during or after the presentation. All right, so after the 5th of October, all companies must be fully aligned with the US NRA. So certificate holders have 6 months to implement the National Risk Assessment. And the clock, as I was saying, has started on the 5th of April last. So after the 5th of October, all certificate holders must be aligned with the NRA. If sourcing from an area with designated specified risk, a company must apply risk mitigation measures to reduce the risk from forest activities to low risk. An important note here is for companies who are sourcing from Alaska or Hawaii, you must continue to use the company risk assessment for these two states. So an example of this is a company that may be sourcing from Oregon and Washington, along with Alaska and Hawaii. After the 5th of October, it would be expected that you would have the national risk assessment and a company risk assessment. So the company risk assessment will cover Alaska and Hawaii, and your national risk assessment in that case would be for Oregon and Washington. Okay, there are not many companies sourcing from Alaska and Hawaii, but it certainly is something to be aware of if you're sourcing from the conterminous US and Alaska and Hawaii. Okay. The next point is the US NRA does not trigger an additional audit for certificate holders. That is a question we've had multiple times from different organizations, but I just want to clarify it does not trigger an additional audit. You will be audited as part of your natural scheduled audits for the cycle that you are on. For companies, and we may have some companies on here that are seeking to add controlled wood to their scope for the first time, or maybe adding the US as an area you're sourcing timber from or products from. From now on, you would be required to use the National Risk Assessment. It is deemed as not a good use of time to be developing a DDS with a company risk assessment and then changing it in a couple of months or in 4 or 5 months to go on to the national risk assessment. So for companies going for their first evaluation or adding the US as a source, we're expecting the national risk assessment to be in use for your company from now onwards. Okay, quick overview of what FSC controlled wood is. The key to the system is to avoid sourcing from any of the 5 unacceptable sources. So first is avoiding illegally harvested wood harvested in violation of traditional and human rights, wood from forests in which high conservation values are threatened by management activities, wood from forests being converted to plantations or non-forest use, and wood from forests in which genetically modified trees are planted. So this is just an overview for everyone and just a reminder of the key principles. So the assessment has occurred for the conterminous US, and categories 1, 2, and 5 were assessed to have low risk in the conterminous US. Categories 3 and 4 have specified risks as detailed in the National Risk Assessment, and mitigation options are also detailed within the National Risk Assessment and the supporting documents. So the compilation of the National Risk Assessment is a significant multi-stakeholder process that has taken place over the past number of years. Identification of high conservation values were based primarily on definitions in the FSC US Forest Management Standard and additional guidance from the FSC US Draft High Conservation Value Forest Assessment Framework. Data sets for assessment areas were used along with regional data, literature reviews, and consultation with experts. Regional meetings had representatives from economic, social, and environmental chambers, and several people attending today's webinar attended regional meetings across the country. And this slide here is a breakdown of the specified risk across the 48 states. So you can see from the slide here, we have specified risk in 2 areas of high conservation values, 3.1, which is the HCV1, and 3.3. And additionally, we have category 4 conversion has also been assessed to be specified risk. Okay. The country was broken into 10 regions, and 5 of which have specified risk. Okay. So as we do have a number of maps to look at and a number of different areas of risk, we'll dive directly into the first one, which is specified risk for category 3.1. So this is a high conservation category for any areas that contain significant rare, threatened, endangered, or endemic species, or contains habitat critical to the survival of these species. Note, it does not mean that any sighting of these species would qualify as a high conservation value, but it's rather the concentration of the species is globally, nationally, or regionally significant. So for category 3.1, the identified regions are the Pacific Coast, Appalachia, and the Southeast. And this category is broken into 2 further parts. So we're looking at the critical biodiversity areas, CBA, for Central California, Klamath-Siskiyou, Central and Southern Appalachia, which are 2 different regions, Cape Fear Arch, Florida Panhandle, and Central Florida. The second component of this are individual species. So we have the lesser slender salamander, to ball salamander, dusky gopher frog, Houston toad, and the patch-nosed salamander. Okay. Right, so these are the maps that have been released as part of the National Risk Assessment, and all of these maps are available on the FSC US NRA website. So if you Google, if you haven't been on there already, it's the same website that has been used for the forum for any comments or consultation that has been happening during the course of the development of the NRA. It's the same website. So if you Google US FSC NRA, it comes up as the first hit on Google. On that page, you will see a list of the different regional meeting outcomes, along with maps for each of the specified risk areas. So the maps all take this format, and we'll be going through each one individually. The yellow section around the edge is the FSC regional boundary, and this gray area is the critical biodiversity area, or the specified risk value that is being mapped. So this is the Central California CBA, and the California floristic, this California floristic province is recognized by conservation organizations as a globally recognized center of biodiversity. The CBA includes 2 general ecological regions that support high levels of biodiversity. So the higher elevation Sierra Nevada mountains and the lower elevation California coastal region. So for the purpose of the NRA, the Sierra Nevada portion has been identified as specified risk. The coastal range is primarily associated with non-forested coastal prairies, and so has been excluded from the CBA. And the Sierra Nevada, which is included, is host to 400 terrestrial vertebrate species, 13 endemic to the range. So the specified risk in this area is for the Sierra Nevada region. So we'll go through each of these maps individually for category 3.1, and then at the end of that section, we'll talk about the control measures. All right. The next map here that has been presented to us is the Klamath-Siskiyou critical biodiversity area. So the biodiversity in this ecoregion is driven by geological, topographic, and climatic complexity. Forest-based diversity in the Klamath-Siskiyou is largely sustained in diverse mixed conifer stands adapted to low mid-fire severity and frequency. So the risk in this area is conversion from a uneven stand structure to more monodominant stands, which can affect the biodiversity values. So ultimately, it is about the silvicultural system that can be used here. So the specified risk for this area is all of the mapped CBA, which are these two sections. So we move along to the Central Appalachian CBA, and this corresponds to higher elevation portions of the World Wildlife Fund's Appalachian Mixed Mesophytic Forest Area. It's one of their global 200 biodiversity areas, and the area represents one of two regions left in the world where relics of ancient mesic forests still exist. These sites have a large number of different tree species that occur, along with an incredibly diverse understory and associated wildlife species. So mesophytic cove forests and spruce fir forests and associated aquatic habitats occur within this critically biodiversity area. So specified risk is for portions of the CBA, and the reason for that is they're not all effectively protected. So it's for portions of this mapped CBA. So moving on to the Southern Appalachian Critical Biodiversity Area, it builds on the previous slide, and this section is largely driven by exceptional aquatic biodiversity. It includes Bibb County glades, which are rocky outcrops, and montane longleaf pine habitats on steep rolling slopes at the edge of the coastal plain. Again, the specified risk is for portions of this CBA. So next we have the Cape Fear Arch CBA, which is a diversity of wet and dry habitats. Drivers of biodiversity in this region include longleaf pine forests and pocossons. Several plant species and bird species, such as the red-cockaded woodpecker, wood stork, and the Cape Fear shiner. Removal of native pine and regenerating with another pine species has been found to be one of the critical things that will affect this biodiversity site. The specified risk for this area is for the entire mapped area in this region of North Carolina. Okay, so next we move to the Florida Panhandle. This is reported to be one of the 5 richest biodiversity hotspots in North America, particularly for its richness of frogs, snakes, and turtles. So the concentration of biodiversity is driven by the river systems, the Apalachicola River, the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers. So you've also got longleaf pine savanna habitats in this area. So the Eglin Air Force Base is one of the largest remaining longleaf pine stands in the area here, and unique steep head ravines, which again is along the Apalachicola River. So the specified risk for this area is the entire critical biodiversity area here as mapped. So all of these counties within. Okay. Then moving a little bit further south to central Florida, critical biodiversity area. So this is in reference to the pine flatwoods in central Florida. And these are associated with xeric upland sandhills that provide a range of biodiversity values. This is similar to other longleaf pine systems. And the native plant diversity is one of the most significant components of the overall biodiversity in the area. And this region is specified risk for the entire mapped area here, the entire CBA. All right, the second component of the category 3.1 is we've now moved from the critical biodiversity areas over to individual species. So this is the lesser slender salamander range. This is for the Pacific Coast region. The species here depends on forest habitat and downed woody debris, which is a very important habitat element. The precautionary approach must be taken in this region, and it is specified risk for its current range as defined by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Chihuahua bald salamander, this is in the Appalachian region. The range is not very well defined. However, it is believed to be limited to a portion of the Appalachian Mountains at the western extent of Northern Carolina, within an elevation range of 975 to 1,500 meters. So converting that to feet is multiply that range by 3. So 975 to 1,500 meters. So this particular salamander is endemic to mesic forests. And the specified risk is for all of Graham County in North Carolina and Swain County over here. Next, we have the dusky gopher frog critical habitat, and this affects the southeast region, and it is specific counties in Mississippi and one polygon in Louisiana. So Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks are a key resource for the dusky gopher frog critical habitat, which has areas dotted around Mississippi and a little bit in Louisiana. Okay, next we have the Houston toad critical habitat, again in the southeast, and this is specifically southeast Texas. So populations have been found in 9 counties, with the largest being in Bastrop County. Species are restricted to areas with soft sandy soils and typically within pine forests. Sources for this critical habitat would be the Fish and Wildlife Service in Texas and the US Fish and Wildlife Service. Okay, now we have the patch-nosed salamander range. And this is in the southeast region with specified risk in Stevens and Habersham counties in Georgia and the Tugaloo River in Oconee County in South Carolina. All right, so that is all of the mapped areas for category 3.1. So we'll just move on here to the control measures. The control measures for each of the categories is written the same, whether it's category 3.1, category 3.3, both of which are under the high conservation value, or for the category 4, which is conversion. So we'll just go through this slide once, but it is it is replicated for each of the 3 areas of specified risk. So if an organization wishes to source from a specified risk area, they must address the specified risk through implementation of the following control measures, and these control measures are mandatory. So part 1 is that a representative of your organization attended the FSC US Controlled Wood regional meetings. So these were the series of meetings held in Asheville, Atlanta, and Portland over the past 12 to 18 months, I believe. Or the organization can review the Controlled Wood regional meeting reports and associated information and provide the information requested. And so that providing the information requested is during an audit. But the location of all of these Controlled Wood regional meeting reports is through the website that we spoke about earlier on, with the FSC US NRA website. It was also sent out in a zip file to all certificate holders who are sourcing from the US. So each of the regional meeting reports are located within those zip files. I will say we've had more contact with FSC US, and they are updating some of the regional meeting reports. The more up-to-date reports are located on the website. It is understood that FSC International sent out the first draft of these. There aren't any changes in terms of the control measures, but there might be some changes in terms of the flow of the document. Okay, so that is the regional meeting reports. Additionally, the maps are located on that website as well. So the first part of the control measure, just to recap that, is either you've attended one of the meetings or you have reviewed the regional meeting reports. Okay, so one or the other of those. I dare say that the second one is more important because that's where all of the information is. So one of those, and for each of the specified risk from which the organization sources materials, the organization implements one or more of the actions identified at the Controlled Wood regional meetings and detailed in the Controlled Wood regional meeting report. Okay, so each of the mitigation actions are detailed in these reports. And the last point for these control measures is they're commensurate with the scale and intensity of the organization's potential impact on high conservation value, or indeed conversion if we're talking about category 4. All right. So now we're getting into the control measure options. As specified for specified risk under category 3.1. These control measure options are directly taken from the Controlled Wood meeting reports, of which there are 3 reports. So the first one, education and outreach, scaled for any level of mitigation. So using the materials developed by or in cooperation with organizations or individuals with expertise in the value at risk. Communicate the conservation value, and the goal is to implement education and outreach related actions that will result in changes on the ground for on-the-ground activities, which could be improvement or enhancement. And an important point here is that it can be scaled for any level of mitigation, meaning it can be scaled depending on the place your organization is on the supply chain and the effect you have on specified risk areas. Okay, so education and outreach. The second option is procurement policy. So this is to develop or adapt a procurement policy that reflects education, outreach, or research findings. So that might be changing how you conduct your procurement based on relevant current science-based education, outreach, and research activities. Thirdly, we have planning. Again, that can be scaled. Sorry, I'll back up for a second here to the procurement policy. This is deemed more appropriate for organizations that purchase directly from the source forest, which would make sense. Okay, so moving on to planning. Again, this can be scaled for any level of mitigation. So this is engaging in regional or national management planning processes and implementation of actions. Next, we have staff and forester training. This would be appropriate for organizations that purchase directly from the source forest. So this is to ensure staff and contract foresters receive training or the equivalent with periodic refreshers that include any new information, such as help with identification of values. And an example of that would be mesophytic cove sites, or refreshers on conservation, social values, and management techniques. The next option is research and mapping. And this one has a note of a two-part option for when high-level mitigation is required. So research and mapping is to engage with or provide monetary or in-kind resources to an entity or alliance that is currently conducting or has capacity to initiate research on a particular value. Part two of this option would be advocating for implementation of research, and this could be through BMP updates, for example. Okay, so from this slide, I'm going to, before we go through the rest of the control measures, I really want to explain this two-part option and figuring out scaling for level of mitigation. Okay, so we'll move on here to the next slide. So the Controlled Wood Regional Meeting reports, all three of them talk about this decision tree for control measures. And it's really figuring out where you place your organization commensurate with scale and intensity of the organization's potential impact on forests in the region. So one of the options, along with the other options that are detailed in the documents, this option here is a visual to be able to broadly see where your organization may fall in terms of the effect on specified risk area. So whether your low level of mitigation is required, perhaps medium or higher level of mitigation is required. So this mitigation matrix was provided by FSC US to assist in determining what level of mitigation is required. So it is about the percentage of specified risk area from which materials are sourced. So that is not the percentage of specified risk in your supply base. It is more the percentage of mapped specified risk area from which materials are sourced. Okay. And it will help with identifying whether more of a baseline mitigation measure is required or you need to apply a higher level of mitigation. So if you're you've looked at your supply base and you realize, okay, I'm affecting less than 25% of mapped specified risk, and my AAF class is class 6, well then it'll give you an idea that a lower level of mitigation is required for your organization. If you find that you look at your supply base and your supply base affects more than 75% of specified risk in a certain area, and you're also in class 5 or 6 here, then you'll start moving into more of a medium level of mitigation, meaning that you may have more of an impact on an area of specified risk than a company sourcing less and affecting a lesser area. Okay, so this is a kind of I would consider this a baseline way of figuring out where along the spectrum for mitigation your organization lies. This should be used in addition to other sections of the risk mitigation matrix in the reports to figure out what kind of impact you have and what kind of mitigation measures are required. Okay. In the previous slide, it talked about a higher level of mitigation for research and mapping. So that might be a consideration for those organizations that fall to this end of the graph. Okay. And we do expect a number of questions from organizations to figure out, you know, where exactly they lie. We'll do our best to try and answer those, and obviously work with FSC on that as well for clarity. So moving on to the second lot of control measure options that are available for specified risk, section 3.1. You have implement management activities, which can be scaled for any level of mitigation. So this is to engage with or provide monetary or in-kind resources to conservation organizations or entities that are facilitating active on-the-ground implementation of management activities. Then we have conservation initiatives scaled for any level of mitigation. Again, this is to engage with or provide monetary or in-kind resources to conservation organizations or entities to augment existing programs. Direct influence, this is for organizations that purchase directly from the source forest. And this is to implement supplier engagement actions that will result in changes on the ground forest management activities to protect or enhance a particular value. So that direct influence also dovetails a little bit with education and outreach. And lastly, as a control measure option for category 3.1, we have BMP monitoring, which is stated as an option for when a high level of mitigation is required. So we know that most all states will monitor their best management practice implementation. And there are metrics around that, but the intent of this particular control measure is to implement monitoring related actions that will result in the state being able to demonstrate a very high level of compliance with BMPs. This may involve independent auditing or sufficient auditing by the state to confirm accuracy of voluntary data regarding BMP implementation. And this may be more of a collaborative effort at a regional level. Okay, so it's going slightly above and beyond the BMP monitoring that does exist. It's bringing it to the next level up in terms of monitoring and reporting. All right. So next we're going to move to the specified risk for high conservation value category 3.3, which is ecosystems and habitats. So the identified regions here are the Pacific Coast, the Rocky Mountain region, Appalachia, Mississippi alluvial, and the Southeast. And the high conservation values are native longleaf pine systems, old growth forest, mesophytic cove sites, and late successional bottomland hardwoods. Okay, so these are the ecosystems and habitats that were deemed to have specified risk in these regions. All right, so we're back to our maps, again, available on the FSC US NRA website. Okay, the gray areas are identifying sections where, in this instance, old growth forests may exist. The yellow is the FSC regional boundary, and then within that we have county boundaries. So old growth forests it has been identified as a specified risk for lands within the Pacific coast and the Rocky Mountain region. So the definition for old growth has been taken from, the definition being used are the type 1 and type 2 old growth areas, and it is coming from the FSC US Forest Management Standard. So old growth is generally considered rare, and it supports a number of rare species of birds, insects, and amphibians. Okay, so here we have the Pacific Coast region and certain sections as well into the Rocky Mountain region. Next on ecosystems and habitats are mesophytic cove sites. So this is it's a specified risk for portions of the Appalachian region. So these sites are highly diverse sites, closed canopy hardwood forest occurring on mesic sheltered sites, which are coves, at a low to moderate elevation. This time I'll give it to you in feet, 1,000 to 3,600 feet, sometimes higher. And they occur in large patches of tens to hundreds of acres on concave slopes that accumulate nutrients and moisture. Next, we have late successional bottomland hardwoods, and these occur in the southeast and Mississippi alluvial valley. So these are floodplain forests that are periodically inundated or saturated. There's very few examples of intact late successional forest. And this is a specified risk for the extent of the bottomland hardwood distribution as per the map. Next, we have the native longleaf pine systems, and this is the southeast FSC region. So longleaf pine savanna is now less than 5% of its natural range. It has high animal and plant diversity, including nearly 900 endemic plant species and rare wildlife. One of the biggest threats seen for this type of system is conversion to other forest types or land uses. And there is specified risk for counties identified on the map. Okay. Okay, so we're back to our control measure options. Again, the mandatory control measures are either having attended the controlled wood regional meetings or be aware of the reports that resulted from those meetings, and implementing one or more of the control measure options as detailed from the regional reports. So we spoke about some of these options earlier on. So there was education and outreach, the procurement policy, planning, staff and forester training, research and mapping, and a new one on this is landowner incentives, which is available for any level of mitigation. So the landowner incentives is to provide monetary or in-kind resources to conservation organizations NGOs, federal, state, or local government organizations with the goal of improving on-the-ground forest management activities to improve restoration or maintenance of values. Okay. So those are the 6 control measure options for specified risk for high conservation value 3.3. All right. Now we're shifting over to category 4, which is conversion. So specified risk for conversion has been identified in 10 states across the lower 48 and for multiple counties within each state. So the risk here is wood coming from areas converted to other land use. And it's specifically around population growth and urbanization. Some counties are partially designated as the non-forested portions have been removed. It must be noted here also that timber sources from areas being converted outside of identified areas of specified risk, so outside of these grey areas on the map, are still considered controversial sources of timber and do not qualify as FSC controlled wood. Auditors typically will conduct research on any large land clearing projects within a certificate holder's supply base, and organizations must still verify that timber is not sourced from these areas. So the control measure options, again, for specified risk category 4 conversion, you're looking at education and outreach, the procurement policy, being involved with planning at some level, getting involved with some of the conservation initiatives, and also research and mapping. Okay. All right. So auditing. So the certificate holder must decide which mitigation options they will implement and how they will implement that option to achieve the level of mitigation required. A certificate holder must document implementation for their compliance verification. Most mitigation options may be carried out individually as an organization or in collaboration with other certificate holders or other entities that have similar desired outcomes. And collaboration is encouraged to scale up potential mitigation impact, and the FSC US will seek to assist with that collaboration when feasible. And the final point on here is effectiveness. So us as auditors at SCS Global Services, our job is to audit certificate holders and ensure mitigation measures have been implemented. And as a certificate holder, it's your job to show how that has happened, to document and be able to show evidence that mitigation measures have been implemented and the thought behind why certain mitigation measures were selected over other ones. The effectiveness of mitigation measures will be monitored by FSC US at a landscape level, and we're expecting some more guidance around that from FSC US as to what type of evidence they will be requiring from certificate holders in order for them to make their determination on the effectiveness of these mitigation measures at a landscape level. So we're pretty much coming to our last slide here. So just a quick overview at this point. Certificate holders have 6 months to use before you can before you fully have to be aligned with the US National Risk Assessment and have implemented control measures as outlined as part of this presentation, and obviously in more detail in those regional reports. And we do recognize that it is a new system and it's not feasible, for example, to have a whole body of research available overnight and being implemented in such a short period of time. However, what we are expecting is that the transition is made by the 5th of October, and that you document the mitigation measures, the intent of what is being achieved, or what the goal is of these mitigation measures, and why your company chose them. Okay. And okay, so we've had a very quick flyover of all the possible specified risk in the country, except for Alaska and Hawaii. Just to reiterate, FSC US will be updating those regional meeting reports located on the FSC US NRA page. The control measure options will not be changing within those reports, so that there should be no hold up in accessing those and workshopping that within your company to make a determination on which options you will take if you're sourcing from an area of specified risk. Please email questions. We've covered a lot at a fairly high level, but the intent of this presentation was very much to be able to give you an idea of what the specified risk was, what the control measures that are available to you, and the different documentation that the different documentation where that information can be accessed. So if there's anything that hasn't been covered, please send me an email if you have questions. I'll leave the chat box open as well for about 5 minutes. If you want to add in some questions there, please do. I'm sure they've been coming in during the presentation. And again, I'd really like to thank you all for your participation today. This is the first in a series of webinars to give that high-level overview so people can get used to what is going on and where. The next series of webinars, we'll actually start honing in on some of the more finer, the finer detail in different regions. We may also find that there are questions that we need to give a little bit more information on as a result of this webinar. So all of your input is very much appreciated and really helps us to help you have a smoother transition over to using the US National Risk Assessment. So thank you very much for your time. I will leave the chat box for 5 minutes and then we will close out this presentation. So thank you. Okay, folks, we've got 2 more minutes left on the chat box questions. So some great questions coming in. So please use the time to add more if you have some. Okay, folks, thanks very much for attending. That's the top of the hour again, so we're calling it. Thanks again.